Admit. So we are recording right now. Unlike last time where I forgot to record it and lost everything that I had done. This could be better. So today I'm going to hit 2 chapters. They're both relatively short. So I think this may be a shorter lecture. But again, if you want, leave your camera or mic on. If you have questions, just shout them out. And I will answer them as I go. It makes it a lot easier for me when you have questions. So if there's anything you want to know or you want me to clarify, just yell it out. Okay, so let's talk about, this chapter is called the Safe Food Handler. Basically what we're talking about here is your behavioral things. Like if everybody stares at Ian for a moment, he's sitting there touching his hair. Sorry, Ian, to pick on you. It's just you've got your camera on, so you're doing. This chapter is about behavior, and it's like one of those behaviors is don't touch your hair when you're in the kitchen preparing food. And I am the worst. I am doing this constantly. I'm constantly running my hands through my hair, touching my face. And now with mask protocol, there's a whole nother level of things that we have to be aware of. But today we're going to talk about behavioral, personal hygiene things that people do and how food gets contaminated. So, basically food handlers and how they contaminate food. The guy there smoking a cigarette. So what is the danger? Why would we care about someone in the kitchen smoking a cigarette? What are the risks? How can they contaminate? Anybody?
Because they're touching their mouths. They're
touching their mouth. So right off the bat, he's touching his mouth, so he's going to get saliva on his hand. He's going to touch food. There's also the risk that when he takes it out, there's spittle. So he's actually spraying germs. There is the physical contaminant of the cigarette and the ash. Nobody wants to get their salad and look down and have a cigarette butt in it. And I don't know about you, but if you've ever been around smokers, cigarette butts end up everywhere. They're not real good necessarily about keeping up with them. So food handlers contaminate food when they have a foodborne illness. So if you are ill, if you have a foodborne illness, you have staph, you have E. coli or something like that, you can pass it on to the guests. If you have a wound that contains a pathogen, so if you have an open sore, if you have a zit, if you have a scratch, a cut. How many people in here, if you're working how many in here have ever cut themselves?
Me, plenty of time.
All the time. I could never be like a master criminal because every fingerprint has a scar on it from where I've cut myself. I am easily identifiable by my fingerprints because I've gotten so many cuts. Well, each time you do that, you're opening up the potential for spreading germs from that wound. In the times we're in right now, the next one, if we have contact with a person who's ill, if you have someone at home who has a foodborne illness or an illness, and then you're in contact with them, you go to work, you can spread it that way. You could be a carrier for it. It could be on your clothing, or maybe you're asymptomatic. Another thing, you touch anything that may contaminate your hands and you don't wash them. So in a kitchen, what are some things that we touch that can contaminate our hands?
Doorknobs. Is that one of them?
Are you the one who said doorknobs?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are absolutely right. That's like number one. So when do we touch a doorknob? When are you likely to touch a doorknob?
When you opening the cooler or something like that.
Yeah, that's one. What about when you leave the bathroom?
Yes.
How do you leave the bathroom without touching the knob?
Get a napkin and open it or like that.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. That's what you need to do is you need to use a paper towel to touch the knob because your hands are clean. After you've used the restroom, you washed your hands, so now you're clean. If you then touch the doorknob, 50% of people don't wash their hands after using a public restroom. So that means that handle is covered with everything that 50% of the people have on their hands. And so if you've washed your hands and now you touch that doorknob, you've contaminated your hand. And that's, you've got to be careful about that. It's funny, people always look at me, I'm trying to leave the bathroom, I'm trying to open the door with my foot or something like that, so they're not touching the handle depending on what the situation is. And then if you have any symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice, stay out of the kitchen because you can spread that to the guests. And this is a pressure that we get from our boss sometimes. It's like, you call in, I'm sick. They're like, oh, we need someone to cover the shift. Come in. And that's just bad management. Or people are like, well, I don't feel good. I'm sick. I'm throwing up, but I need the money. Again, that's irresponsible for the people that you can make sick. So some things that contaminate food. This guy looks like a sad sack here in this picture. So first thing, scratching the scalp. This is what I was giving Ian a hard time for. When you're touching your hair, running your fingers through your hair, there's potential contaminants on it. You can have open sores on your head. Wiping or touching your nose. And this is I do this all the time. Even when I'm in here giving this lecture, I'll do this. Like when I'm thinking. But again, there's the potential for transmission that we have to be aware of. Rubbing an ear, the same problem. If you have an open wound or pimple, same problem. Here's one, wearing a dirty uniform. Your uniform, when you go in each day, should be clean. You work a shift, you have food particles all over you. Even if you are relatively clean, there are small food particles on there. Those food particles are harborage for bacteria and microorganisms. So you just, wear a clean uniform every day. Coughing or sneezing into the hand, like that, that's now you've contaminated your hands. So what is the appropriate way to sneeze?
The elbow.
Yeah, the vampire sneeze. So you're into your elbow. And spitting. Spitting again, you're just spreading contamination. And this is not as much a problem as it used to be. But I used to have to deal with chefs who wanted to use smokeless tobacco in the kitchen. It's like, well, I've got a spit cup. I'm not, and I'm real careful about it. It's like, no, that's disgusting. You're spitting in the kitchen. That's not acceptable. So, good habits. Being clean. Take a shower every day before work. I actually had a situation once where I had an employee come in. He'd had a few days off. He came in and he smelled so bad, I had to send him home. It's like, dude, I know you haven't showered. Like I can smell you across the room. And so personal cleanliness, proper attire. So the chef's coat. Well, you'll often have options on this about like what your chef's coat's going to look like. Has anyone in here ever worn a short sleeve shirt in the kitchen? No one's ever done the short sleeves? No. Why do we have, it's cooler, but why do we have long sleeves? Why do chefs wear long sleeves usually?
To protect your arms when you're cooking?
It's to protect your arms, from burns and things like that. And so then, if you get burned, now you have an open wound. Short sleeves are an option, but the long sleeves provide more protection. When I got married, my wife wore shoulder-length opera gloves, like gloves up to here, because she had sheet pan burns on her arm.
Oh, wow.
Kitchen. So that, that's just something that happens. I've got scars all over my arms from where I was working and had an oven rack fall, and my arm got pinned between two oven racks in a 400-degree oven. So I've got a grid pattern burned into my arm on the top and bottom. Follow hygienic hand practices. So that is things like proper hand washing, keeping your nails short, not wearing fingernail polish. Those are all good hand practices. Even clear fingernail polish can flake off, and the flakes harbor bacteria. Generally avoiding unsanitary habits and actions. Being in good health, and then reporting illness if someone is ill. So these are just the things, kind of the minimum sort of things that you should do and maintain. I feel this one is probably one that, given that we're living in the time of Corona, that all of you are probably very familiar with. How to wash your hands. First thing, you want to use water as hot as you can stand. So 100-degree water, at least, that's a little bit warmer than body temperature. Use a lot of soap. And soap is important here. The bubbling, foaming action of the soap actually denatures the proteins in the bacteria and the viruses and destroys them. So part of what washing your hands with soap does is it removes them from your skin. It washes them down the drain. But the other part is it actually breaks them down. So they're not harmed. It essentially kills them or destroys them. So be sure to use plenty of soap. Scrub your hands vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds. Clean underneath your fingernails and between your fingers. So you want to be sure to clean between your fingers and under your fingernails when you're cleaning. Again, those are the places that we don't, usually when we wash our hands, we'll do this. Well, that's great. That gets the palm of the hand really nice and clean. Does nothing for these areas, which also hold food potentially for bacteria. So how long are you supposed to wash your hands?
20 seconds.
How long?
20 seconds.
10 to 15 seconds.
Oh.
10 to 15. So the rule that I was taught was the amount of time to sing happy birthday to you. So even now, as a 50-something-year-old man, when I'm in the bathroom, if I'm not paying attention, you'll hear me in there, happy birthday to you, happy birthday. Just kind of singing the song as I wash my hands because that's the amount of time it takes. Then you want to rinse your hands and then dry them with a single-use paper towel. Do not use your side towel that, if you're using a side towel in the kitchen, because it's not sanitary. So use a single-use paper towel that you can throw away. Or an air dryer. The towels are better to prevent spread of disease than the air dryers, but if that's your only option, use that. And then use the towel to turn off the faucet when you're done. How often do you wash your hands? Like when you guys are in the lab, how often do you wash your hands? How often do you think?
Every time. You're supposed to do it every time you change from cooking something.
Right. Next time.
So like if I was cooking something on the stove, I wash my hands and then I go back to like cutting vegetables or something like that.
Yeah, next time you're in lab, just keep a running tally of how many times you're washing your hands, because I've done that, and in a 8-hour shift, I would wash my hands sometimes 50 times. And, because I'd constantly be moving between stations and stuff, 50 times in 8 hours. Okay, so when do you wash your hands? Well, after using the restroom. That one should be obvious, yet 50% of people don't do it. Anytime handling raw meat, poultry, or seafood, both before and after. You don't want to contaminate it with your hand, and then when you're done, you don't want your hands to contaminate whatever's next. So before and after handling raw meat. You want to do it after touching yourself, your hair, your face, your body. After sneezing or coughing or using a tissue. You want to do it after eating, drinking, smoking, chewing gum, or tobacco. So anything that you move to your mouth, there's a potential for contamination. So if it's a straw, if it's a piece of gum, anything where you're moving towards your mouth, you want to wash your hands. You want to wash your hands after you use chemicals, like cleaning chemicals. So if you've got degreaser or sanitizer or anything on your hands, you want to wash your hands. You wash your hands after you take out the garbage. Now, the Serve Safe exam, which you have to take at the end of this course, there are certain questions that I see a lot of times. And one of them will ask you, when are you supposed to wash your hands? And they'll talk about taking out the garbage. And they'll say, before and after taking out the garbage or after taking out the garbage. You really only have to wash your hands after you take out the garbage because you don't care if you contaminate the garbage. So after taking out the garbage, after clearing tables or bussing a table, you don't know what other guests have on their hands. Touching your clothing, your apron, your chef jacket, something like that. Handling money. After you handle money, you want to wash your hands. So I want everybody to weigh in here on this one. So you'll have to turn on your mics. So if how many people in here would wash their hands every time after they handle money?
Me.
I try to, or be around.
Okay. Money is filthy. It is disgustingly filthy. So keep this in mind. How many of you in here would, if you saw a penny in a toilet, pull it out? Like you walk in a public bathroom and there's a penny in there. How many of you would pull out that penny?
Oh no. Public
No.
bathroom, no.
No.
Sierra, would you? Because your hand is up.
No.
I'm going to put it down.
Okay. What if you walked into a public bathroom and you saw $100 bill?
Okay.
Would
That's a different story. That's a different story.
Would you fish it out?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Every dollar bill you handle, you don't know what the person before you did with it. You don't know if it's been in a toilet. You don't know. It's moved through so many hands. So you have to assume that your money, that someone has used it in a toilet, because you don't know. It could have, it's dropped on the ground. You don't know what's happened to it. So every time you handle money, man, wash your hands, because, who knows what's on there. And then the last one, just anything that contaminate your hands, wash them. So antiseptics or hand sanitizers. Hand sanitizers are not a substitute for hand washing. They are not. Your main protection is not the glove and it is not the hand sanitizer. Your main protection is washing your hands. The sanitizer, well, the glove provides an extra layer of protection, but you may not realize this, gloves are porous. They actually have tiny microscopic holes in them and bacteria can pass through them. So the gloves are not absolute protection. They are an additional layer of protection, but they're not absolute. The sanitizer is an additional layer of protection, but your main protection is hand washing. So if you do have a sanitizer, we are all using sanitizers a lot right now. You only want to use them after you wash your hands. You don't use it in place of washing your hands. You can't say, oh, I handled chicken, I'll just use some sanitizer and go on to the next task. You got to wash your hands. You sanitize after. Whatever sanitizer you're using has to be FDA compliant, because it has to be able to dry and not leave a residue that you can use to contaminate food. And you have to let it dry. Like most of the hand sanitizers we use when they're wet, do you know what it is? The sanitizer? It's mostly alcohol. It's either ethyl or methyl alcohol. And it has some things added to it so that you won't drink it if it's ethyl alcohol. But a lot, many of these things are contaminants. So we have to let it air dry. Now, once it's dry, it's safe. But when it's wet, it's the sanitizer is a contaminant when it's wet. So you have to let your hands dry. So taking care of your hands. Keep your fingernails short. Don't wear fake nails. Fake nails especially. There are a lot both under the nail or under the nail bed or under the end of the nail are all places where dirt and things can gather, and there's no really good, efficient, clean way to clean them. Wear a finger cut. So if you look down here at this image in the corner, you can see he's got a little rubber thing wrapped around his finger. That's a finger cut. So the first thing you want to do is, if you get a cut, clean the wound. Then you put a bandage over it. Then you put a finger cut. That's the appropriate way to take care of your hands. Never wear fingernail polish because it'll flake off. It can contaminate food. And that's what I often have trouble with students. It's like, oh, you gotta take your fingernail polish off. It's like, well, I just got gels put on. It's like, sorry, you gotta take it off. So glove use. It's kind of weird because I'm old enough that I remember when gloves were not required. That when I started cooking, almost everything was done barehanded. So some rules about gloves. First thing, it is gloves don't replace hand washing. And you can't wash gloves. The gloves, when they come out of the box, are they're not sterile, they are sanitary. But once you've used them, they're not. You can never do not wash gloves. It just doesn't work. And they should fit right. So if your gloves are too small, they're going to split and leave you unprotected. If they're too big, you can get, it will expose part of your skin because they're too big. The other thing is, anyone ever worn a glove that's too big in class or handling food? You have? So did you ever happen to cut the end of your finger off, like the finger of your glove off when you're trying to do something when the glove is too big?
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And so now you have a contaminant in the food. I've done that many times. I'm cutting away. It's like, oh, where did the end of my glove go? And then I have to throw away what I just prepared because somewhere in there's a piece of a rubber glove. So when do we change gloves? When they become soiled or torn. Okay. So if they're visibly dirty or I've handled something dirty, change my gloves. Every time you begin a different task, you're supposed to change gloves. So if you've got to cut 5,000 carrots, well, okay, you don't have to change your gloves. But if you switch from carrots to slicing cooked chicken breast, you need to wash your hands and change your gloves. Now, I said if you're cutting 5,000 carrots, you don't have to change your gloves. Well, you do if it takes you more than 4 hours. Because imagine that your gloves have food on them. 4 hours in the temperature danger zone. Sitting on your hands, that's the temperature danger zone. So every 4 hours, you have to change gloves. And anytime you're handling raw meat, so raw meat, seafood, or poultry, so after you've done that and then before you go to handle, like if you're making a sandwich, you've been handling some raw ingredients, now you got to go grab a bun, and you wash your hands, change gloves before you touch that bun. Because the bun's not going to get cooked. Some places still allow bare hand contact with food, like you don't have to wear gloves. But for the most part, it's just as practice to wear gloves. So what do you need to wear when you're at work? Well, hair restraint. Okay? So that's some sort of other hair restraint. The exception to this is they're bald. Some places will allow you to not wear hair restraint, head shave. But that depends. Some places also require you to wear a one of the things that gave me utmost respect for my wife when I first met her, she was training me, is when I met her, she had her head shaved. I just completely shaved because she was in the kitchen and it was a very competitive environment with men, and she basically had to be better than they were at everything. And one of the things was she was just more serious, so she shaved her head. Let's see, you wear a hat, you want to wear clean clothing every day. You want to remove your apron when you leave your food prep area. So when you go to the restroom, you take your apron off and leave it on the table. You do not take your apron to the restroom. There's no reason for your apron to be in the restroom. It's an extra layer of protection. You're just going to contaminate it. And you want to remove your jewelry from arms and hands before working with food. So generally, what you can wear, what's allowed, is you can have a plain gold band with no in it. This is acceptable. But I'll tell you this, even with wearing this, like working at shop, corn muffins seem to be the worst for me. But I get done corn muffins, wash my hands, everything's really clean. If I pull my ring off, like I didn't pull my ring off, the entire inside of it is coated in cornmeal or cornbread batter. This will harbor food, which can be a source for bacteria. But you're allowed to wear a plain band. I would not wear a watch in the kitchen because again, get food stuff inside the band. And I can tell you that I have, done before, take my watch off, and the back of it is just coated in food and batter or something like that. It's disgusting. I do wear a watch in the kitchen. I wear it on my button on my jacket. So I can look down at it. It doesn't get contaminated. just be aware. What you can't, oh, I lost my slide. So we don't wear, piercings, no facial piercing, all, because again, they can come loose. You don't wear an engagement ring because the stones could come loose. All of these are hazards. Okay? Things that food handlers should not do. You should not eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum or tobacco in the kitchen. Now, tasting. You have a separate tasting spoon. You have to make sure your food is good. But when you don't, stand on the hotline, eat a sandwich. You have to eat, leave the food prep area, eat your meal, wash your hands, put on clean gloves, go back. So you don't do these things when you're prepping or serving food. You don't do these things when you're in food prep areas. You don't do these things when areas that require clean equipment or you're cleaning equipment. You just, like if you're pot sink, you don't eat there because the pots that come out are clean. You don't want to contaminate them. Okay, these are some things you will absolutely need to know. They are on the exam. You will need to know them. So if one of your employees comes to you and says, I got a sore throat, I got a little fever here. Well, now in the COVID, if someone comes to you and tell you they have a fever, you run away screaming. But in regular times, someone says they have a little bit of a fever or sore throat, you allow them in your operation. They cannot be in the kitchen. They cannot be around, so they can't work with or around food if they have a fever or sore throat. It's not allowed. So maybe they could be a host, but they're going to be pretty restricted in what they can do. Now, if you serve a high population, like let's say you're a retirement home, then you exclude that employee from the premise. They're not even allowed in the door. Like, oh, you got a fever? Call me when you don't have a fever anymore. Then you can come back in. What if we have an employee that has vomiting or diarrhea? It's like if they have one of these symptoms, they are excluded from the operation. They are not allowed in the door. They don't even come in. If you're sick, if you're vomiting, don't come to work. And you're not supposed to be allowed to come back to work. You're not even supposed to come back until you've been symptom-free for 24 hours or you have a note from a doctor. So if you've been or if you've had diarrhea, not even supposed to come to work for 24 hours, just don't come in. And don't allow your in. Okay. If an employee has jaundice, you exclude them from the operation. Don't even allow them in. So what jaundice?
Yellowing of the skin.
Yeah. So if they are visibly yellow, their skin eyes are yellow, it's a sign that they have a liver disease. They're having poor liver function, which is hepatitis. And hepatitis A is transmissible by food, and it is very transmissible. It is very, very easy to pass to someone else. So if someone comes in, they have jaundice, do not allow them in the operation. Like, they're not allowed in the door. And so you just don't even allow them in. Now, if someone has been diagnosed, like this is not just that they're throwing up, not just that they have jaundice, but they've actually been diagnosed with either salmonella, shigella, E. coli, hepatitis, or norovirus, you want to exclude them from your operation. They're not even allowed in the door, and you have to contact the health department. So if you have to diagnosed, you have to call the health department. And then what you want to do is, person contact their medical practitioner and find out when they're going to be clear to go back to work. Because with things like hepatitis, you can be symptom-free. Well, with many of these, you can be a carrier. So has anyone here ever heard the phrase typhoid? Has anyone ever heard that?
No.
Ian, you've heard of Typhoid Mary? Yeah. So anybody know who Typhoid Mary was, what she did? Yeah,
No.
no idea? Okay, so typhoid. So if we look at the first disease up here, Salmonella typhoid. So typhoid is a disease. It's in the Salmonella family. She was a poor immigrant. She was a woman. She was Ireland, and she was a cook. That's what she did for a living. She was a cook. And so, what's that? I'm sorry. Did I say something? Okay. If you did, just try again in a minute because I didn't hear what you said and didn't say anything. So Typhoid Mary did was she was very poor, and there was an outbreak at the family she cooked for. They tracked it back to her. It's like, oh, you have this disease, you are symptom-free, but you're a carrier. Well, she didn't believe in science. She didn't believe it was real. So she was fired, but there was no legal provision for what to do. So what she did was she went to work for someone else as a cook, and they got sick and died also, just right like her. And this went on several times where she would, the health department would track this outbreak back to her and people dying. And then and eventually got to the point where she would change her name and go work somewhere else as a cook and make those people sick. And finally, she actually got banished since there was no really legal provision for what to do for her. Public health officials actually sent her to an island that was used as a sanitarium to live out her life because they couldn't get her to stop working as a cook and essentially killing people. It's an interesting story if you want to look it up. Okay, so give me a minute. I'm going to close these slides. I'm going to open the next set of slides. So just give me a second to get to those. Okay. Make sure. Okay, so what do you, can someone tell me what's on your screen?
That's like the introduction.
Can you see my notes page?
I can see I can just see serve safe, chapter 5, and then title, and then the YouTube link.
Okay, great. So you can't see so you're not seeing like my notes and stuff. This is perfect. All right.
I'm not.
Great. So now we'll talk about the next concept, and this is one of the big concepts in the book, and it's important to what we're trying to do is we have to look at the food. We have to look at what we do as part of a continuum. So it's the flow of food from the moment we think about buying it till the moment it goes in the guest's mouth. We're responsible for it, and so it's this flow. So sometimes we're ordering, and sometimes we're checking it in, and sometimes we're storing it, and sometimes we're preparing it, and sometimes we're plating it, and then sometimes we're serving it. And at each one of those stages, something bad could happen. And so at each one of the stages, you have to be aware of what the risks are. So it's important to look at the food as a process, as this flow of food. And what we want to do throughout the flow of food, primarily we're looking to prevent cross-contamination. We don't want the dangerous things from one food to get on another. And the other thing that we don't want to do, or we want to be aware of, is we want to prevent time and temperature abuse. So again, bacteria grow under certain conditions, and that is at the right temperature and if they have enough time. So what we want to do is keep hot food hot, above 135. We want to keep cold food cold, below 41. We don't want to sit in that zone, and if it is in that zone, we want to limit the amount of time. How much time do we try and limit it to? How much time can food spend in the temperature danger zone?
2 hours.
4 hours. So
4 hours.
4 hours, that's the amount of time we have. And if it's more than that, and that's total. So in this entire flow of food, if it is abused, that time is cumulative. It's not like, it can sit out on the loading dock for 4 hours. And then it can sit, on the holding table for 4 hours, in the temperature danger zone. It's the total amount of time it spends in the temperature danger zone in all these steps. So the steps are purchasing, receiving, which is where it comes in on the loading dock, storing, sitting in the storeroom, preparation, where we're with it, cooking it, holding it. So maybe I've made soup, but I'm not going to serve it till later. It's sitting in a soup well. That has to be true. Well, I've made my soup. It's in the service. I have a bunch of leftovers. I have to cool it properly. Well, now I have to reheat them properly if I'm going to use them, and then I have to serve them appropriately. So
if you buy ingredients, will the provider, will the person who's shipping the ingredients tell you how long it's been in the temperature danger zone?
That is one of those reasons why we buy from reputable suppliers, because what we're assuming is they've handled it in such a way that we have 4 hours total in our possession. So that's what you want to buy from someone who's reputable. And for some items where it's particularly risky, and this is from another chapter when I talk about receiving food, but for instance, people receive eggs. Eggs come with these things called time temperature indicators, which is just it's a piece of temperature sensitive paper, and it changes color over time. And so what will happen is there's a grid on it, and if it's been left in the temperature danger zone for 1 hour, 1/4 of the sticker is blue. And if it's been 2 hours, half the sticker is blue. If it's been 3 hours, 3/4 of the sticker is blue. If it's been 4 hours, then the whole sticker is blue, and you know those eggs have no time left for them, and you shouldn't receive them at all. So some items have specific ways that we check it, but mostly it's one of those, I'm buying a reputable supplier, I assume they have handled them properly. Okay, so preventing cross-contaminated food, what do we do? Well, using separate equipment. You know, this is a great thing. If you have a knife that you use for cutting raw poultry, if you can have that knife and you only use it for raw poultry, that's fantastic. If you have a cutting board, it's great if you can have multiple cutting boards that are color-coded. So like when we have, and you've probably seen this, we have cutting boards all different colors. What do you think green is for?
Vegetables.
Yeah, raw vegetables. What do you think brown is for?
Cooked food.
Cooked meat. Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think blue is for?
Red, raw meat.
Seafood.
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 That is for raw meat. And so if you can everyone, and it only works if everybody knows, if everybody's on the same page. So if some of you think, well, yellow is for vegetables, and some of you think yellow is for raw poultry, that's worse than if you just were really good about cleaning and sanitizing your cutting boards. So if you can color code things, that's awesome, but that requires training. But what you also want to do is you want to clean and sanitize your surface after your work surface after every task. So that includes washing your hands. That includes sanitizing your knife. So you clean your knife, you sanitize your knife, you let your knife air dry. You clean and sanitize your cutting board after every task. Other ways we prevent cross-contamination. We want to prep food at different times. So let's say that I'm asking you to make chicken salad. And so you're going to have to dice some vegetables. You're going to have to dice some raw chicken before you cook it. Ideally, what order should you do that in?
Do the chicken first and then the vegetables.
Why would you do the chicken first?
Because you have time to clean up your station before you do the vegetables.
Okay. Or you could do the vegetables first and you should clean and sanitize between every task. But if you do the vegetables first, and the vegetables contaminate the chicken, that is much safer than if the chicken contaminates the raw vegetables. So I would do the vegetables first and then the raw chicken last so that it has the opportunity to contaminate the fewest things.
Okay.
Yeah. Another way that we can make sure that food is safe is we buy it prepared. So if here the picture is shredded lettuce in a bag. Well, if you shredded lettuce, it's been handled in a factory. If you're getting from a reputable supplier, we are assuming that they have handled it properly. If they've handled it properly, that means it's safe. And so if we buy this lettuce in a bag, it should be safe. Whereas if we cut the lettuce ourselves, we're aware of the risk of the contaminated food handler, the contaminated knife, the contaminated cutting board. So that's an option. You can buy prepared food. But we're chefs. We like making things. So that's not always something we're going to do. We want to avoid time and temperature abuse. So part of it is what's the best way to monitor our temperature? So right here, someone is, you can see on this, they've got they've got a clipboard and they're writing down temperatures. And in the background, you can see what looks like soup on the stove. So what they're probably doing is, let's say we've got soup that's being held in a hot well. They're taking those temperatures and writing them down and doing that periodically, like once every hour, once every 2 hours, as a way to track it. If you work in a facility that has a walk-in cooler, you'll probably notice that during really busy period, in the middle of lunch, your cooler gets up above 40 degrees. It may get up to 45 or 50 degrees. Now, if the health inspector comes in and your cooler is 50 degrees, that's a critical health violation. But if you have a chart next to the door taped there where you show at 9 o'clock it was 35 degrees, and at 10 o'clock it's 35 degrees, and at 11 o'clock it was 35 degrees, and at noon it was up to 50, and at 1 it's at 35 degrees, and that it's that way every day, then the health inspector understands, well, this cooler works, it's just the door was probably open when they took the temperature. So also this monitoring and tracking your information and keeping it gives you protection from the health inspector. It allows the health inspector to see that you're following good practices better. Avoiding time and temperature abuse, have thermometers available. How many, does everyone in here have a thermometer?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you want to, your thermometer is a great tool. You want to use it all the time, and you want to take care of it. And in the next few slides, I'll talk about how you use your thermometer, because there's some aspects to it you may not be aware of. You want to minimize the amount of time that food spends in the danger zone, and if the time temperature standards haven't been met, like if food at the end of its, it's been in temperature danger zones too long, or we cooked it to not the right temperature, we take corrective action. So like with cooking, a corrective action is you've got a chicken breast on the grill. You take the temperature, it's only 155. Well, it's supposed to be 165. You can't burn it. So what do you do? You've got a chicken breast on the grill. It's 155 degrees. What should you do? What would you do? Are you going to
Put it back on the grill?
Yeah, you're going to put it back on the grill and keep it cooking. You're going to cook it to 165 degrees. That's the corrective action. If it's at the wrong temperature, the corrective action is cook it to the right temperature. Okay, so here is a common thermometer, what's called a bimetallic stem thermometer. I was looking to see if I had one on my desk. These are great. They're super cheap. They work well, and everybody should have at least one of these. The way they work is really simple. When metal heats up, it expands. I'm sure we've all seen this. As things get warmer, they grow, they stretch out, they get a little bit bigger. Well, different metals do it at different rates. So what they do is they put in this, there are two pieces of metal in this long stem. So if you see this long part right here, inside it there are two pieces of metal. And those pieces of metal expand at different rates. So what happens, so we have the dial here, and we have these two pieces of metal. And as they expand, they push the dial and make it turn. So if the top one is, say, copper and the bottom one is tin, it expands more, it grows more, it turns the dial. It's very simple. But how many people in here have ever dropped their thermometer? Like it's fallen out of your pocket or fallen on the table or something like that. Anyone ever drop it?
All the time.
Yeah. So have you calibrated it?
Not in a long time, no.
You should calibrate it. It says that you should do it every time it's dropped. You should calibrate it once a day. At the beginning of the day is not a bad idea, but you want to calibrate it regularly. And the way we calibrate it is under the head, there is a nut. And usually your case that the thermometer fits in has a wrench that adjusts this nut. And I'll talk to you about how you adjust. I'll talk to you about how you set the temperature in a minute. So just bear with me. But when you use your thermometer, one thing to keep in mind, see this dimple right here in it? You may have noticed that in your thermometer. They all have it. Does anybody know what that dimple's for?
No.
Okay. What the dimple is for is this part of the thermometer up to the dimple, that's the part that takes the temperature. This part of the dimple up here this part of the thermometer up here doesn't do anything. So if you stick it in all the way, the part at the top isn't doing anything. This is the part that takes the temperature. So just keep that. The dimple is the point that's sensitive, essentially. The rule of thumb for your thermometers is they're supposed to be accurate within 2 degrees. The thermometers that we use mostly in the kitchen, like these, go up to 220 degrees. And it's just because 0 degrees is about as cold as we ever do anything. 212 degrees is boiling water, and most of our cooking falls in that range. But you can have other types of thermometers. Like you can have candy thermometers, and those go up to 500 degrees. But mostly this is what we use. There are types of thermometers. Thermocouple or a thermistor is basically an electronic thermometer. It has a probe that you can insert into things to take temperature. And they have different probes. So you have probes for wet, you have probes for dry food, probes for meat. But an electronic thermometer is called a thermocouple or a thermistor. They're commonly used. They can be accurate. We can use them for higher temperatures. We have laser thermometers. Everybody's probably seen these. Probably every time you go in the hospital or go in a building, someone with a laser thermometer takes your temperature. They point it at your forehead and see if you have a temperature. But we can use them in a kitchen, but they have very specific types of use. Because what the laser thermometer doesn't do is it can't take the temperature inside. So it's not useful for, say, cooking meat, because what it's going to tell me is the temperature of the surface. So this is good for telling if a piece of equipment is preheated or something like that, but it's not useful for taking temperature of food. Has anyone ever played with a laser thermometer? No?
No.
They're pretty
No.
fun. What you'll find yourself doing is pointing them at your friend and seeing what the temperature is. But they're not, they have a specific use, but it's not for taking the temperature of cooking food. Now, earlier you had asked about reputable, or about, do I assume that the food is, that I have 4 hours when it comes in? And I told you that some foods come with time temperature indicators. Here's a picture of one. And you can see as the food spends more time in the temperature danger zone, different circles turn blue. Basically, this piece of paper changes color, and it tells you if the item has been temperature abused. They're put on the package by the supplier, and so when you get the item in, you just look and see, hey, what temperature this has been at. And it shows up with eggs, because shell eggs, short of cracking an egg, there's no way to tell what the temperature is. So for some items, this is just standard way that's done. Okay, so the biometric thermometer that we have to calibrate. And like I said, you should calibrate it pretty often. You can see here the red thing is the case that the thermometer came in. It has a wrench built in it that you can adjust the nut on the bottom, and it will allow you to check the temperature. And there are two ways that we do this. There's an ice point method and a boiling point method. And we use these 2 points, these 2 methods, because these are numbers that are consistent. Now, the boiling point changes a little bit with your elevation. So, if you're in Denver, you actually have to adjust it slightly because you're a mile high. But for the most part, these points are known. So what water freezes at?
Isn't it 32 degrees?
32 degrees, and it's always 32 degrees. What temperature does water boil at?
125.
Nope.
250.
It's surprisingly low. I remember that.
212 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's always, and as long as you're at sea level, it's always 212 degrees. So we know those 2 temperatures. So if I want to make sure my thermometer is accurate, I can set it to either 32 degrees, because that's the point of, I can take some ice and check it that way, or I can boil some water, and I know that's 212 degrees. So I know those points. So I can use that to set my thermometer. Now I have a question for you. Which one would you rather use? Would you rather use the ice point method or the boiling point method?
Ice.
Ice point method.
And this is an opinion question. I'll tell you, I would rather use the ice method, because if I spill ice water on me, well, no problem. If I spill boiling water on me, that sucks. And so it is safer and easier to use the ice point method, just because it's less dangerous than boiling water. So what you want to do is you want to fill a large container with crushed ice. You want as little air in it as possible. And then you fill it so that the gaps are filled with cold water. And so this will be 32 degrees. Then you put your thermometer in it, at least to the dimple, because that's the point where it takes the temperature. And then you hold the handle, or you can see the red handle there. You turn that to adjust it so it reaches 32 degrees. And when you're at 32 degrees, then your thermometer is The other method, the boil point method, is the same idea, except that you turn it to 212 degrees, because that's going to be the temperature of boiling water at sea level. Okay, so when or how to use the thermometer. Some rules: you want to clean and sanitize your thermometer before and after every use. So how many people do this? How many people in here clean and sanitize their thermometer every time they use it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You should. I know that when I was working in the kitchen, this was something that I struggled with because, you know, I get real busy. It's like, I don't have time to do this, clean and sanitize it every time. But if you think about it, you're jamming this piece of metal into, say, an undercooked piece of chicken. So now it's got salmonella all over it. And if you don't clean and sanitize it, now you're putting that, you know, into a piece of beef. And, you know, now you've transferred those microorganisms. So you want to clean and sanitize it between every use. A common way for sanitizing these things is to carry alcohol wipes, the little disposable alcohol wipes, and you can use those to wipe the thermometer after you've washed it. You can also use sanitizing solution that's commonly available in the kitchen. You want to calibrate them regularly. So I'd say at least once a shift, but especially if you've dropped it, you want to make sure, calibrate it to make sure it's accurate. You want to check the accuracy of the thermometers for your coolers and your freezer. So use a different thermometer and make sure that they agree. It says here, never use a glass thermometer to check food temperature. Does anyone at home, like their parents, your mom or your grandma, have an old glass cooking thermometer? Anyone? No one? They're not very common anymore, but it used to be that the thermometers were glass. So what's the hazard there? What's the risk?
That's my
It
brain.
can break.
Yeah, it's very delicate.
Might crack.
You get glass in your food. You also have mercury in your food because thermometers are filled with mercury, which is poisonous. So it's a bad idea. We still see glass thermometers in the kitchen in one place. Anybody know what that is?
Those are the candy thermometers?
Yes, candy thermometers.
All right.
So candy thermometers are still commonly glass, but that's a risk. So you just have to be aware. I think that in your career, those will probably be outlawed, and it'll only be something like a digital thermometer that'll be allowed. But still, in candy making, we use glass thermometers sometimes. And just as a caution for you guys in the kitchen, if you're ever working, how many people in the kitchen have had to mix up syrup or cook candy yet, like cook sugar? Have you guys done that yet?
Mm-mm.
Be very careful when you're in there, because here's something to keep in mind. One, sugar is sticky, right? We've all probably eaten the lollipop and sugar on our hands. It's sticky. You're familiar with that part, right? If you get hot sugar on you, it sticks to you. Now, if you get hot sugar on you and spray it with water, what's it going to do?
Crystallize.
Yeah, it's going to harden and stick to you even more. Now it's going to solidify on you. And has anyone in here ever got splashed with hot water, like with boiling water before?
Mm-hmm.
That,
Yes.
It hurts, right? Yeah. It's 212 degrees. Boiling sugar, 450 degrees.
Wow.
So it's more than twice as hot, and it sticks to you. So just be very careful when you're cooking sugar, because it is, 450 degrees and sticky. So it is a bad combination. Let's see, using a thermometer. The appropriate way to, and you'll get a question about this on the ServSafe exam. Where do we stick the thermometer? Into the thickest part of whatever we're taking the temperature of. So if you're cooking turkey, where do you stick the thermometer?
Part of the chicken.
The breast part? I don't know.
Yeah, you want to find the thickest part. So usually the two places you'll check on a turkey will be the center of the breast, because that's going to be the last thing to cook, and as close to the thigh joint as you can get, because the thigh also, because of the bones and where it's usually kind of folded in there, it's the last thing to get heated up. So You can take a temperature of your turkey, and like if you just stick it in the top of the breast, oh, it's done. But you slice it open, and it's not done. So you want to do it in the thickest part. So if you think about a chicken breast and the way a chicken breast is shaped, you know, they're kind of shaped like this. You don't want to stick the thermometer down here in the end of the chicken breast. To take the temperature of the chicken breast, you want to stick the thermometer into the thick part, the thick end of it, because that's going to be the last thing that's going to get cooked. And as a rule of thumb, you want to take temperatures in at least 2 different spots, you know, because there could be some different other cooking. Just you want to make sure things are completely done. You want to sit there for 5 or 10 seconds and wait for the needle to stop moving to make sure that it's accurate, so that you get a steady temperature. And if you're cooking things in a microwave, those are different. And we'll talk about that. The microwaves cook unevenly, so you have to check in more places. You have to allow it to sit. But the general rule is take the temperature in the thickest spot. So I have covered those 2 chapters. Does anyone have any questions? Because I'm more than anything, any questions you got, I'm more than answer, clear anything, explain things as well as I can.
No questions.
No questions? Okay, well then that is the lecture for today. I'm going to put up a quiz this afternoon, and you know, it'll cover those 2 chapters. So again, if you have any questions, shoot an email. I'll put the video up, and everybody have a good weekend.
All right, you too.
Thank you for coming in.
Have a good day.
You too.
Good.